Here's our router configuration demo. So first off, what I've done is I have connected the rollover cable from the console port of the router to my RS-232 port, or my serial port, that I've plugged into my PC. So I actually have to use a USB to serial adapter because I'm plugged into a laptop. There are lots of those adapters out on the market. So I have the rollover cable connected to the console port. I have an Ethernet cable run from the network interface card of my PC to fast Ethernet 00 of the router. So now we need a mechanism to actually use the keyboard and see the input and output of the router on our screen here. So we talked in an earlier video when we talked about the router basics. We talked about how the boot up process worked and we compared it to a PC. We saw that the router and the PC are very, very similar. They both have processors, they both have storage space, they both have random access memory, and they boot up in relatively the same order. But the one piece that the router is missing is a mechanism to hook up a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. So we have no way of accessing that device directly with a keyboard and mouse. So that's why we now need to use some kind of application to connect through the serial port into the router so that we can use our keyboard now on our PC to send messages into the router over that serial cable. So the application I use for this is PuTTY. Now, PuTTY is freely downloadable. It's open source, outstanding, heavily supported application. It's very lightweight, and it has all the tools you need for an IT professional, especially a network engineer. You have access to use the serial communication, so we can access devices via our serial port. We have access to SSH, which is an encrypted session using an IP-based connection, specifically using TCP. So SSH is an application layer protocol that uses TCP at the transport layer and IP at the network layer. And that protocol is encrypted. Telnet does essentially the same thing as SSH, only it does it unencrypted. So Telnet operates at the application layer as well, TCP at the transport layer, and IP at the network layer. So Telnet and SSH are for accessing our router over a network connection via an IP address, and serial communication is for accessing it via the console port, which is what we want to do. Now, you have to know what serial port your particular USB to serial adapter is connected to, or you'll have to know what COM port the serial port on a PC where you have it built into the PC is connected to. Now, the good news is there's only 4 COM ports, COM 1, 2, 3, and 4, at least typically. Chances are it's going to be one of those 4 ports on your device. With this keyspan adapter, it comes with some software that actually tells you what COM port it's hooked up to. And mine is hooked up to COM 3. So just be aware that you're going to have to find out what COM port you're connected to. It's going to be one of 4 options, COM 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so we hit open, and what we get is this blank screen then with a cursor on it, and hopefully we're ready to go here. So I've already booted up the router, so it's already turned on. So what I do here is I just press enter to get started. And when I press enter, what happens is it just sends a message to the router, and the router responds back with wherever command prompt it's at right now. So the message I get back is, would you like to enter the initial configuration dialog? Yes or no? Now, what is this initial configuration dialog? Well, since Cisco routers come out of the box blank with no config on them at all, what we have to do as an admin is we have to configure every parameter on that device. Well, Cisco wrote this little application to hopefully help people who have little to no experience operating something. Cisco is hopefully addressing newbies here to give them an option to set up the router in a relatively easy way. Well, the big problem I have with this initial configuration dialog setup system is that it asks you poor questions, it asks them very slowly, and it doesn't actually do a complete initial config for you. So it's kind of junk. And I can tell you when the last time I used it was when I first learned Cisco routers back about 15, 16 years ago now. I tried it once and it was slow and awful, and every single time after that I say no. So we always say no to do you want to enter this. Sometimes it will come back and ask you a second question, It'll say, do you want to terminate auto install? And auto install is the same exact thing. It's the initial configuration dialog. It's just asking you the same question in reverse in case you made a mistake. So just be aware of that. You might get asked two questions there. Just read them carefully. You're going to say no to the first one and yes to the second one if it asks you the second question. Now, once we get that, we get a message that popped up here. Press return to get started. Then all of a sudden, all these messages came at us on the screen. What these messages are, these are log messages. And typically, these are recorded on the device, or we configure them to send them out to a log server so that we can hold on to these messages so that we know the different states of our router, and we can do troubleshooting by looking back on past events that happened. When we first boot up the router, it's checking all of the interfaces and systems on the router, and it's giving us messages about their statuses. But you notice now that I don't have any prompt here. I just have this cursor, this green cursor at the bottom of my window here. So if I press enter again, it brings me to this prompt.